So really the goal of this project is trying to understand how forest management and specifically frequency of forest management affects energy of flow in forest ecosystems. So um, basically we have two sites. We have the Stephen F. Austin Experimental Forest that is infrequently managed in terms of kind of the burn regime is every 8 to 10 years. It hasn't been really thinned since probably the early 90s, 1990s. And so, as you can see here, there's the kind of basal resources that would support this food web are primarily either leaf litter and detritus or kind of these seed-3 plants. And we're comparing that to a frequently managed site at Boggy Slough Conservation Area that is on a burn regime of every 1 to 2 years, thinned frequently, so it's almost a savanna-like landscape in a shortleaf pine forest. And with that, we're setting up these box traps, and we're collecting all the consumers that occur in each forest type. And what we're trying to do is understand how basically energy is supporting those different consumers. And really what we're targeting is snakes. And maybe, Connor, you want to talk about why snakes are kind of a good organism to test these questions?
So we're using snakes as this model to study these questions because, for one, snakes are really diverse in a lot of different life history traits. And I'll kind of get into kind of another thing that my project's looking at. But also they're obligate carnivores, right? And snakes tend to have a wide range of dietary preferences. So, for example, you have snakes that are dietary specialists. So things like the mud snake, which you could find out here, which are like only eating sirens and amphiomas and other kind of really specific aquatic prey or organisms or associated prey. And then you have other snakes that are typically generalists. And as well, you also have these different foraging strategies among snakes too. So you have things like coach whips that are really active foragers that are cruising through the landscape, hunting throughout the day, versus things like copperheads, which are sit-and-wait predators, which are posting up at a spot for days at a time, sometimes just waiting for that prey item to come by. And so the other thing that we're kind of looking at, along with like kind of the food web perspective, is also like, well, there's different types of forest structure. This management, these different management regimes also result in these different forest structure things, as well as changing maybe the resources they're supporting the snake communities. And so, as you can see, like the forest structure is a lot different too. So places like the experimental forest, you have this intense or this higher basal area, and you have this really noticeable mid-story component which shades everything out. And that's what Chris was talking about when he was talking about this being detritus, kind of the basal resource. But in addition to that, we're looking at the traits that snakes have. So like when I said that traits were diverse in a number of life history traits, well, there's a lot of different morphologies that are associated with their feeding ecology too. And so one of the things we're looking at is looking at the traits of the snakes we catch and see how that relates to the forest structure we see from these two different management regimes, and start to look at what are we seeing at each site in terms of differences between snake abundances and species, and is there any way to explain how there might be environmental filtering going on that's excluding some species but allowing other species to persist?
So here we have a box trap. So this is a passive trap. And the way it works is an animal will intercept the drift fence we have here. And hopefully it'll start going towards the box trap. If you want to look inside here, we have 4 funnels. And basically the animal will go inside the funnel, fall into the trap, and become trapped until we check it each day. So because it's a passive trap, animals accumulate over time, so it requires a really intensive sampling effort where we need to check these traps every day when we leave them open. So, and Connor can flip we have a little hide box in here. We can see if we have anything. Nada. So it's always important. So we have a hide box, we have water for the animal, but it's also important to check under every funnel because copperheads will hang out underneath there or other animals. We never want to reach in with our hands because there's copperheads and coral snakes and cottonmouths all around
salamander.
here. Oh, we got a marble.
A couple of them.
Sweet. Oh yeah. So we got a couple marbled salamanders here. So it's a marbled salamander. Probably brought out by the rain.
Cute little guy.
So we got 2 of them. So we're taking data on every animal that's captured, and we're able to make inferences about their abundances across different habitat types. Oh. So Connor, do you expect to get a lot of snakes today?
No, not really. Typically, snakes don't like to move when it's raining or the weather's cool out. And when it does rain, they usually need a few days for it to warm up. But some snakes will come out after the rains, right with the timing of when amphibians start to come out, so they can forage and take advantage of all the resources that are out.
What do we got, Connor?
So this is a southern leopard frog, Rana spinocephala. So these guys are pretty common throughout East Texas.
And it's a metamorph, right? Or
Yeah, it's a metamorph. So the adults actually get a lot bigger than this. Pattern where they get their name from, the leopard frog. See this random pattern of dots on their back. You can also see these 2 lines right here that go toward or along their back, and how they kind of start going and then they break up and they're inset medially. And so that's a characteristic that usually identifies leopard frogs from all the other ronids in East Texas. Whatever.
Let's see if we got a snake in here. See how the boxes move?
Oh, yeah. There's 2.
Okay.
2 crickets, Daniel.
Those are, he doesn't know those yet. Those are Gryllidae.
Okay.
So Gryllidae.
So typically we always put the box in the front corner. So you can see here that the box is moved. So obviously there's an animal in there. So here we go, the big reveal. Oh yeah, there's something in there.
Oh, it looks like you ought to get your gloves, Daniel.
Is it a mouse? Oh!
Oh!
Toma.
Oh, it's so cute.
So the easiest way to get these guys out is to actually let them climb out on their own. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sweet.
So that's a pack rat, Neotoma floridana.
It's right in that corner right there.
Give me a second. Yep.
So even though we see an animal, we always check the funnels first in case
That's going to be a nice question.
there's any venomous snakes hiding on underneath. So we always check everywhere, every inch of the trap before we stick our hands in. You check.
That's what it is.
Oh.
Yeah, but it's Volcata.
Mhm.
Yeah. So they'll kind of have these longitudinal kind of spots going down the dorsum there, and then on the side they got kind of a black mass going through the eye and along the side of the body. And this is an adult too. And that frog's in the back.
Frog in the back.
Hey Connor, how do you know that's a bronze frog?
And so you can tell bronze frogs from southern leopard frogs based on the fact they have this overall kind of uniform color, typically, but also if you look at the dorsal, these little dorsal folds right here, you can see that they're kind of split. It's a little hard to see on this guy. But instead of being on the inside and inset medially, they're kind of set to the outside just a tad. And then if you look on the underside of the frog, you can see that they have this really mottled chin, and on the legs too.
Yeah, camel cricket on the two camel crickets. Oh, there's a third one.
Grab them off there.
Need the ant poison. The frog. Can't tell what it is. So we run the risk of, basically as animals are trapped, they're easy prey to fire ants. So we try and minimize that by sprinkling ant bait, as needed, and throwing away the carcass.
So what kind of spider is this?
There's another one.
It's a wolf spider, so they're in the family Lycosidae. There's a couple different species.
What's it yet? Copy it did.
So the box traps are an example of a passive trap that accumulate captures over time. Active traps are a little bit different in that they modify the microhabitat to make it attractive to animals to go inside. But the animals aren't actually trapped in active traps. They can come and go as they please. So a couple common ones we use to capture amphibians and reptiles are cover boards like this one here. This is just, a piece of plywood that's left over. But basically it creates a humid environment that's really attractive to snakes and amphibians. So they'll hang out underneath this cover board. And because the animal's not captured, when you flip it up, you have to be ready to grab whatever animal's underneath because they're not actually trapped. Another example is PVC pipes that we use that we'll put in the ground or attach to trees, and they're really attractive for tree frogs. So again, the tree frogs aren't actually trapped, but they're attracted to those really humid microhabitats. So yeah, this is an example of an active trap. So which way you want to flip it?
This one. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Oh, you promised a snake on it.
Skink. Oh no.
Got it? Where's he at?
Like under shoulder.
This one? I see him. Oh, he's definitely gone now.
So it's when you're flipping cover boards, it's important to put the board back to maintain that microhabitat so it remains attractive for those animals that you're targeting. And so you always put the board back in the same place as you found it.
I want to make sure. Where's it? Ow!
I think that's probably.
There you go. So there's a little brown skink. Cincella lateralis.
These guys are pretty abundant in forest ecosystems. They almost swim through the leaf litter here. You can basically kind of see them swimming away from you when you're walking through the woods. They're pretty abundant in kind of areas that have a high duff built up, lots of leaf litter. You'll typically see them on warm days coming out to forage. And this is an adult.
I like these tags.
You do like them?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we have a western rat snake here, Anthrophis obsoletus. So this is a, probably a middle-sized one that can get pretty long. So some kind of diagnostic characteristics is they'll typically have these kind of saddle shapes on their dorsum. But some of the individuals here in the experimental forest can almost get all black, so it can kind of blend in. They also tend to have a kind of a white chin, right underneath their head. So these guys can kind of they tend to be more arboreal, so they'll eat things like bird eggs or nestlings and things like that. They can also forage on the ground as well. They're constrictors. Anything else to add, Connor?
Sure. So Chris was talking about how they're really good at climbing trees, and one of the things that makes them pretty different from a lot of other snakes we have is if you actually look at their belly, you can kind of see that it's what's the right term for that? It's kind of curved, so it's concave, right? So it's like concave, which allows them to grip trees. So these guys can go straight up pine trees very easily because of that. So their body is kind of, if you were to look at it, it's kind of triangular in a way.
Okay.
And we can put this guy on this tree right here to show how he climbs.
Okay. Wow.
So this is a hot bucket. So any venomous animal, we're gonna store in a hot bucket. So it's just a regular 5-gallon bucket, but basically we buy these lids. And you can do a couple things with them. So there's a little window here, so you can keep an eye on it to see where the animal's at. And you can unlock it, and this window opens up if you want to try and basically tube it in the bucket. So you can put a snake tube in and try and get it in there so it's easier to handle, so you can pull it out. And to open it, it's just kind of a screw top. And you can, if you want to look inside, we have a couple different tools that we use to handle venomous snakes. So we have a snake hook and then tongs. Tongs are, they give you more control, but you got to make sure that you don't grab an animal too hard to injure it. Snake hook is a little bit gentler, but an animal will fall off the hook, and you got to kind of wrangle it. So Connor will grab this guy out of the bucket. We never use hands grabbing venomous snakes.
Let me know if I'm in the way.
Okay.
Pretty little guy.
So this one is kind of probably considered a subadult, but it's interesting because there seems to be a wide range of like copperhead sizes, and I don't know exactly what is explaining this, but for example, boggy slough, we tend to get larger copperheads on average, and here they all tend to be kind of small and like kind of the same size. We do get big ones here occasionally, but if you look at all the captures, most of them are typically the size that we find here. The juveniles are even much smaller than this. They can be super, super tiny.
And like the really juvenile ones, don't they have like a little green tip on their tail at some point?
They do. So they have like a little yellow, and you can see on this one there's still a faint hint of the yellow on there. But there's a lot of evidence to support that the juveniles will use the yellow on the tip of the tail as a lure to lure in prey. So they give live birth, and actually when they do give birth to their litter, they actually will stay with the litter until they have their first shed. And so there's actually an interesting amount of maternal care with vipers. They kind of like wrangle the young ones and like keep them around them. And other vipers have even been seen, like most of the vipers in North America, they all do this. The mothers all do this, and they'll do interesting things like if there's a predator around, they'll flail, potentially play dead and try to distract the predator from their litter. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. They stay with the young and kind of keep the young around them until they have their first shed. So yeah, interesting. They're good moms.